So I just wanted to talk briefly about a weird topic. I decided not to do a full-length video about this, mostly because of time, but also because of the fact that I've been so mentally and creatively drained lately that I don't think I'm capable. Um, I wanted to talk about the MCU. Two things before we start. What does MCU mean for the five of you who don't know? This means the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which at this point in time technically involves the Incredible Hulk, Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3, Thor, Thor 2, Captain America, Captain America 2, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, and Avengers 2. I may be missing something like that, but whatever, you get the idea. There's also some comics and a few other ancillary things that do actually help flesh that out as well. So, it's not just limited to the audiovisual media. In addition to this, the second point I want to mention is that I'm going to be spoilering all over the place freely for everything except Age of Ultron. I have not seen Age of Ultron yet. I will be watching that tonight at my midnight showing. They don't do midnight showings here anymore. I don't know if this is true elsewhere, but they literally do not have a midnight showing. They have a 6:30 and a 9:30. We're going to the 9:30. So I suppose I'd say spoilers are okay for Age of Ultron if you want to add them in here because, by the time this video goes live, I will have seen the movie. But just try to think about putting like spoilers in caps or something for as a considerate point for anybody who has not seen Age of Ultron yet and still wants to. But you are warned. Spoilers for everything else is going to be coming out of me. Where I want to start is the very concept of the MCU. For those of you who don't know, the MCU is its own canon. It is separate and segregate from the comics rather strongly, actually, in a lot of places. I'm not going to say if that's a good or a bad thing, because that's a matter of opinion, but I do think it was an absolutely necessary thing. There's two big reasons why. The first and most obvious, and really the only reason that needs to be mentioned, is the fact that, well, let's just say that if I say I like insert comic book character A, I always have to add the addendum depending on the writer. The problem is, there is no continuity for the comics. Not really. I mean, there is, but there isn't. And anybody who's a big comic book fan out there, you're probably nodding your heads right now as you know what I'm talking about. Comic books, and even with their own contiguous stories, which do kind of reference each other and do kind of keep to a sort of a string continuity and a setting continuity sometimes, they're not consistent. They go all over the place. Sometimes they'll be like this, sometimes they'll be like this, sometimes this will work, sometimes it won't. Sometimes they'll just pretend these events never happened, It's a mess, and it's kind of understandable why that is. I mean, you've got dozens of different writers and dozens of different producers pushing forward hundreds of comics, every year across a lot of years. I mean, this is absolutely natural. I'm not making fun or trying to deride the comic book industry here. It is natural that the continuity is all over the place. It's one of the reasons I feel like the smaller, more focused comics tend to be overall better quality because they can focus on the one contiguous story. But so no matter what, the movies cannot, and the MCU, the cinematic universe, cannot follow the comic book continuity because there is no such thing. The second reason I just alluded at, though, with starting your own canon means you can keep it tightly focused and keep it contiguous amongst itself. At first it was just the movies and the comics, and then, yeah, I know, right? But movies and the movie comics, and then movies, movie comics, and then the show, and then they added a second show. I think that's actually it at this point. So it's a lot easier to coordinate when you're starting over and you've got this. It's like, okay, here. It's the same thing that I just mentioned earlier that comic books themselves do. I like to refer to this kind of a thing as a interpretation, but the most common word you'll hear a Hollywood person or whatever say is a reimagining. Both terms are accurate. There's no elitism here or anything like that. To use an example of what I mean, Battlestar Galactica, the most recent show, was a reimagining / interpretation of the original. To explain what I mean in brief, though, if you have not seen that show or the original, you take the concept of the original and make a new story out of it. It has elements of the original, usually rather well recognizable ones, and you could call it, an alternate version of the original of whatever it is being based off of. But it is decisively and definitively its own work, separate from that, right? To give another example, and I don't want to get too much into controversy here, but the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies are also a reimagining of the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit book. And there's no real denying that. Whether that's a good or a bad thing, please keep those comments out of here. I'm just mentioning it for the sake of getting across my point of what a interpretive, reimaginative work is. And the MCU is exactly that. Now I'm going to give my opinion, which is I think that's a good thing, for basically the two reasons I've already gave. One, well, it's been a really. I, honestly, I guess I didn't give the first reason. The first reason is it's been some really high quality stuff. The only movie I actively don't like rewatching is Iron Man 2. Other than that, the rest of the good stuff is good. And even Iron Man 2 is not what I would call a bad movie. It's just what I would call an unnecessary movie. But I don't want to get into that here. But I do like the presentation. I do like what they've done with it. I do like this particular version of Captain America, of Iron Man, blah, blah. I was not actually a fan of Iron Man. I mean, of Tony Stark, if you prefer, from the comics. And I was only occasionally a fan of the Captain. And I hated Thor, you know? A story I like to tell every now and again, I know I've said this on the stream, forgive me for those of you who've heard this, is that I didn't actually watch the Thor movie, because why would I? It's a movie about Thor. No interest, right? No judgment, but no interest, so I didn't actually watch it. And then I watched the Avengers, and then that same night watched Thor, because the Avengers got me interested enough in Thor and in Loki in order to watch it. And lo and behold, I actually really like Thor. So hey, the second reason though is that continuity the thing I mentioned. I think it's wonderful that they can do continuity here, and they're not afraid to change the status quo. Probably the biggest implementation of status quo alteration happened in Captain America 2. Which I will skirt the issue to try and avoid spoilers, but basically, it's what I like to call a setting changer. It's something that affects the entire setting, and there's no real getting away from that, and I really hope that we continue to see the effects of that in the future. Lord knows the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show has been showing the effects of that, and arguably so is Agent Carter, but I'm getting off topic. So the MCU, then. Now, like I said, this is just a few thoughts I kind of wanted to share with you guys, because to be blunt, I'm very hyped for Ultron. I'm super excited about seeing it. I'm really happy. I wish I had a costume to wear, but I don't. I mean, I've got my Jedi robes and my Kingdom Hearts robe, and that's it. That's all I got. I'm a terrible geek. But yeah, I'm really hyped. I'm really excited about seeing this. I'm really looking forward to it. And I just kind of wanted to share a few thoughts I had about the MCU as a whole without focusing on any one given movie. So let's talk about some character stuff first. Now, I mentioned Thor earlier, but what I really want to talk about is Loki. Now, let's be blunt. There's no denying that Tom Hiddleston is why Loki is so damn popular, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. A great actor can really bring life to an otherwise moderately interesting or even a disinteresting character. In fact, to be blunt, I think Robert Downey Jr. is the reason why Tony Stark is so awesome too, if I could be blunt. But Loki is interesting because he goes through an interesting character arc through the 3 movies he's been in, and he is one of the only characters I'm going to talk about in this little bit whose character arc has not yet finished, in my opinion. It is clearly and decisively dangling. Now, I know we've got movies to come. We've got at least one more Captain America movie. We've got at least one more Thor movie. We've got Ultron tonight. And we've got the Civil War movie coming. So, we've got movies coming. So, obviously, you could say not all the character arcs have finished. But what I mean by that is, other than Loki, all the characters I'm going to talk about, in my opinion, their first character arc, their initial arc, has actually completed. Loki's has not, though. Loki portrays an interesting kind of a character who is not what I would call insane so much as broken. There's something clearly wrong with him. In fact, it occurred to me as I was in the shower getting ready just now to record this, the irony of the situation, and that Loki is someone who is... He views life through a lens. This is all my interpretation, by the way. Just boilerplate. This is all my interpretation. And as always, I welcome your guys' comments on your own interpretations. And feel free to yell at me and tell me I'm horrible and stupid. I get those comments all the time. I'm totally used to it. Moving on. Loki views life through a lens. A distorted lens that shows not reality, which, again, is terribly ironic for the character. So he doesn't really see things correctly. And I think, explains everything about why his behavior is completely inconsistent from one moment to the next, especially in the first movie. In the second movie, he is much more consistent, but that's easily explained, which I'll get to in a moment. But even in the first movie, in Thor, he is... I think the best way to define him is to relate him to the Doctor over in Star Trek Voyager, the EMH. Those of you who've watched my Voyager Ruminations know I gush about Robert Picardo's performance and the way they use that character pretty much universally great. But one of the most defining traits about him I've always felt, and I've talked about this in those Ruminations, is that the Doctor was exceptional. I don't mean like after he became sentient and sapient and all that. I mean, he was exceptional. He was brilliant. He was a one-of-a-kind miracle of technology, even by Star Trek standards. And he was so complicated and so wonderful and so top of the line, and yet everyone treated him like he was a wrench. he never got real praise or accolades for what he did, except from Kess. That was the only exception. And I've always felt that the real reason when the Doctor's personality started to grow and emerge, that he became, frankly, so arrogant and so pompous and so full of himself, is because of a need to defend against that. Because he felt that he was better than he was getting the credit and praise for. And it's not till way further into the series that other characters actually start treating him like he's amazing. That does happen. And there's some good character moments when that happens. But in his formative years, he was treated like a nobody. But he knew he wasn't. So you see where I'm getting at. The defensiveness of building up your own ego, your own self-image, to compensate for the fact that everyone's treating you like crap. You see how this relates to Loki, right? I would argue, especially based on what we saw in Thor 2, that the only person who ever treated Loki with any degree of respect was his mother. Let's see, we've got his brother, who probably did genuinely love his brother. I'll admit that freely. I don't think, even in his dickish days, Thor was actually a bad person. So I think he cared about him, but he always treated him like he was a lesser. And his father, who isn't actually his father, Odin, yeah. And he's always kind of looked down just a little bit by everyone else involved, too, the whole band. I get the strong impression that Loki, despite being someone who is brilliant and cunning and very good at thinking on his feet, and so skilled that he can actually learn magic, which in the MCU is actually really rare if you pay attention. Very few people can actually use magic, even amongst the Asgardians. Most of them have tools or warrior combat prowess or specific abilities or powers or whatever, but he is actually effectively a mage. And that's unique and amazing. And yet he is treated like a lesser. I point especially to the fact that his mother taught him so much of this stuff as a way to exemplify one of the reasons why he cares about her and basically no one else early on. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I don't want to talk about his relation to his mother yet, because that relates to his relation to Thor. So we see his distorted lens and see his skewed perspective, and he's the one who actually lets go, if you'll remember, at the end of Thor. He's not tossed into the abyss. He's let go. Now, for those of you not aware, spoiler alert, Thanos actually is the one who found him directly or indirectly as he was tumbling through the astral plane or whatever he was going through. Thanos decided to use him as a tool, because that's actually Thanos' modus operandi. Despite being ridiculously powerful, especially when he's got the gauntlet on, Thanos prefers to work through other people. It's how he works. It's how he thinks. He's a manipulator. He's a schemer. So, and by the way, I apologize to anyone who's cringing, but I've been calling him Thanos for like a bajillion years. I'm not going to start calling him Thanos. Sorry. Ridley, not Ridley. Anyways, so Thanos gives him knowledge and the scepter and insanity. I mentioned Loki's performance throughout all of Avengers is much more consistent, but it's so easily explained as the fact that there's an ant on my wall I have to kill really quick. Die, Ant-Man! You don't belong in the Avengers! Die, die, die. Okay, anyways. I'm not a fan of Ant-Man. I'm curious about how the movie's going to be. Where was I? Thanos. His behavior is much more consistent. It makes more sense because he is effectively under the same control that he is putting others on. Not literally. I don't think Thanos is literally puppeteering him, but he is clearly under the influence. And actually, if you notice, there's some really subtle stuff with his eyes, too, just like there are on some of the others, the people he hits with the scepter. And it makes sense that the scepter, which can passively affect people around it, like it does in the scene where all the Avengers are on the helicarrier, it's just sitting there, and yet it's causing that kind of strife and discord and making their worst aspects of their personality rise to the surface. Thor and his arrogance, Captain America and his grief and guilt, Iron Man and his need to prove himself. I don't want to get too much into the other characters right now, but the point is it's all boiling to the surface, which is why they nearly have that come to blows over that. It's all because the scepter's there. Loki's wielding the scepter, and we do see all of his worst traits, and he is fairly consistent in all of them throughout the Avengers. Except for one brilliant scene where Thor tries to reach out to him. It's not the first time. It's during the battle in New York City, and Thor is there, and he says, we can stop this together. And Loki smiles, and a tear goes down his eye. It's a tiny little thing. It's one of those blink and you miss it. But Loki actually sheds a tear. I feel like I've actually had like hours-long discussions about that tear. No joke. I have quite a few comic book fans, and so a lot of people who really like to discuss the MCU with me. And I'd love to discuss it with you guys if you want to hit my forum up and toss some thoughts around. I'm totally willing. But I've heard a lot of different theories about that tier, from the fact that it's the real Loki demonstrating himself for a second, to it's the Loki realizing just how far he's gone, to Loki realizing just how much he's lost. You know, there's several different interpretations, but it's the first moment I feel that really shows inconsistency in the whole work. And then he stabs Thor, you know, reasserting the Thanos personality, for lack of a better term. But then we reach Thor 2, aka Loki's third movie. Thor 2 is much more interesting because it... I mean, Loki completely stole the stage in Thor 2, but that's okay because Tom Hiddleston. But also because he really had a lot of good character stuff to go through. What we see, the way he's talking to to Odin, shouldn't call him his father, it's very clear as he's talking to him that he does not respect Odin at all. Anything that he might have ever felt for Odin is gone completely. And it's pretty clear that that's true in reverse as well. There is nothing between those two people. They are effectively strangers for all intents and purposes, arguably enemies. In the way Loki defends himself in his actions on Earth, you could tell his heart's not in it. He's not actually defending himself. He's just going through the motions because he knows his fate is sealed and whatever, and he's going to be killed. And his mother interceded on his behalf, and that catches his attention. And now he has been imprisoned for all time instead of killed. His mother's also the only one who actually really bothers to come and see him and visit him. There's a wonderful scene, wonderfully human scene, ironically, where he tries to deny that she is his mother. But again, and this ties back to what I said earlier, Odin never really respected Loki. Thor didn't really respect Loki, but his mother did. His mother decisively treated him like a person rather than a lesser. This whole lesser thing also explains something, by the way. I'm sorry, I skipped over a point. Why conquer Earth in the Avengers? Now, of course, we've got Thanos' to help explain that, but why that motivation? Why not Asgard? It is within Thanos' power to conquer Asgard, let's be blunt. And so if he wanted to offer that, you know, onto the bargaining table to get Loki, he could have. But he wanted Earth. Why Earth? Well, the most obvious reason, and the reason most people, I imagine, assume automatically, is vengeance. Screw Earth. Screw this stupid place, and screw Thor, who loves this place. Ha ha. Yeah, okay, you're precious Earth. It's my Earth now. But there's another reason, I think, which is much more powerful. The need to constantly be proven to be better. To be continuously surrounded by people who are definitively his lessers. The whole lesser thing is true throughout the whole thing. The way he talks to the Hulk is a great example of this. I am better than you. I am a god. And, you know, puny god. Because even to someone who is as strong as the Hulk is, Loki sees him as another human, a.k.a. someone beneath him. Because he needs to. He needs that, like I said earlier, it's that defensive mechanism. I am better than you. I am better. And you just keep repeating it, even when all evidence shows that that's not the case. So that's, I feel, the big reason why he went after Earth, to always be the superior. But getting back to what I was talking about with his mother treated him with respect. His mother treated him like a person, not a lesser, and was the only one who does so. It's telling that despite his attempt to declare that she is not his mother, he obviously thinks he does. Again, very human scene, but he actually calls her mother after this scene happens. Several times, in fact. But he never calls Odin father again. He does call Thor brother. That's the final point, well, the second to the last point of Loki's character arc, or at least the beginning of, like I said, the character arc isn't finished, which I'll get to in a minute. I think that through Thor 2, Loki has really figured out the fact that Thor has actually changed. Excuse me a second. That Thor is genuinely going to treat him like a person now, rather than a lesser. And Loki, I feel that that's the real reason Loki warms up to him and actually has really good chemistry and camaraderie with him throughout Thor 2, all things considered, is because Thor is no longer treating him like an insect. He may be treating him like an enemy. He may be treating him like someone he can't trust, but there is respect behind that. And so Loki responds in kind and starts to think of his brother a little bit more like his brother. That leads us to the final conundrum. Remember, from Loki's perspective, again, my interpretation, Odin is his enemy. Not just not his father, he is flat out his enemy. Ignoring the things that Odin has done to him and would do to him again, yeah. At absolute best, you could call Odin a stranger with bad history to Loki, in Loki's mind. But by the end of the movie, Loki genuinely has grown to have respect and care for his brother, Thor. I find that ironic because I feel like Loki's plan was always to usurp Odin once he was let out, but he had to change that plan out of respect for Thor. Because Thor was not his enemy. Thor was not someone he wanted to hurt. So rather than openly turning against Odin, and by the way, obviously we don't know exactly what happened, but Loki clearly defeated Odin, either through trickery or through skill or through cunning or through any combination of the above. Loki won, so he could do that. But he couldn't do it openly. And the only reason, I feel, is because of Thor. He did not want to be Thor's enemy anymore. And so he played the part and faked his own death specifically and explicitly for the sake of bringing Odin down in secret and then taking the throne like he always wanted. Now, why is it I say this is not the terminus of his first character arc? Because he's not done yet. He has not finished growing as a character, and he's only completed step 1 of his plan. This is the first thing he wanted, the throne. He has finally gotten it after 3 movies, and the question just looms. Now what? And that's, I feel, where Loki's character is going to actually finish its first arc, hopefully in Thor 3. Let's talk about the widow. Natasha, if that is indeed her name. Now, I will talk about why I feel she belongs in the Avengers after this bit, because there's a thing I want to say about the Avengers and then about Ultron himself, which I'll say after this. She is an interesting character perspective because she portrays someone who is, in many ways, a Palpatine. Or a Vane, if you prefer the Final Fantasy version. She is very manipulative, but she is almost perfectly manipulative. I am in awe of how manipulative she is. She is in total control of virtually every interaction she has with everyone else. The reason she has that inflappable perspective and nothing really phases her thing is because she knows she's always on top of the situation. She may be facing up against people who are stronger than her or have better weapons than her or have more backing than her, but she will never actually be afraid of them because she knows she's on top of this situation. She has already beaten them. In her tone, in her word choice, in her spacing, in her dialect, in the way she presents her body language, her face, her features, little sounds, audible things. She is constantly portraying a completely fake persona. And she does it constantly around everyone, specifically to engender the kind of response she wants. That's how she manipulates. That's how she has control. She doesn't literally manipulate you. She doesn't trick you, per se. She changes herself, knowing you will perceive her differently, which gives her control of the situation. It's her comfort point, her comfort zone. It is then immensely telling that the one and only person in the Avengers who actually gets under her skin is the Hulk. Even Banner, actually. She is always on edge around Banner. She's always just a little bit uneasy around Banner, but when she actually becomes the Hulk, she is downright terrified. The one and only time in Avengers where she shows stark terror. Real terror, not some fake, not so, oh God, please don't hurt me. No, she is genuinely horrified, and of course she is. And yet, ironically, it's not because he's the Hulk. It's because she has no control. She cannot do what she does around him. The Hulk doesn't think that way. The Hulk doesn't respond that way. She actually tries this, if you remember. She tries to use comforting tones and simple terms and using her words, and the Hulk just responds violently. Remember that? Right when he's starting to turn? And she realizes in that moment, what she's already suspected up to this moment, she has no control at all. That's what scares her. She is completely out of the zone. To try and explain what this feels like to some people out there, I'm going to ask you to picture something completely fantastical. I want you to picture that you can breathe normally. Now, I can't do this because I can't, but just, I'm sure most of you can just be like, I breathe normally. Breathing is great. It's so normal. It's just an average part of your life. It's just there. And then when you're around one person, you have asthma attacks. Just being around this person, and you can't breathe normally anymore. You can barely breathe at all. You wheezing, gasping. You need the breath thing. I don't even remember what it's called. I haven't used one in a long time. But that's the equivalent of how she feels. All of her comfort, all of her normalcy, all of it is just taken away when she's around him because she knows she can't do that with him. Now, this continues into Captain America 2 in a funny way, because you see her as she's interacting with Cap trying to do the same thing to him, but it doesn't work. And the funny thing is, it's not because he's better than her or he's incapable of being manipulated or anything like that. It's because the Captain America of the MCU, which is, by the way, my favorite interpretation of it, is just a kid from Brooklyn. He is like the most down-to-earth, honest, good guy that exists in the whole setting. And he has one trait that is unique to him for her, and that is that she can trust him. Try to keep in mind, this is a woman who has grown up in a spy society, a proper spy society, as I like to call it, as opposed to some fictional ones which are not. The term trust no one may sound like a slogan for the X-Files, but it has very literal connotations, especially in a society like that. You literally can trust no one. She doesn't even trust Fury, for God's sakes. Respect, sure, follow orders, yeah, definitely, but trust? No, 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 no. You don't trust anyone. But she can trust him. And you can see... I find it interesting because some people think there's a romance blossoming between the two in the second movie, but I've always disagreed with that. I don't think it's romance so much as the fact that she is growing... There is a comfort. Well, not a comfort, that's the wrong word. There is a familiarity. There is a connection between the two that grows, the chemistry there, because of the fact that she grows to realize... and has grown to realize that she can honestly trust him. He probably can't trust her, and of course he can't trust her, but she can trust him, and that, again, throws her completely out of whack. It's the one thing she doesn't know how to deal with. She may be able to manipulate him, but the mere fact that she would be out of control with him with regards to that perspective is very telling, and that's how her first character arc basically concludes, with that realization and with the knowledge that she now needs to try something else, basically. She either has to step up her game or step out of the game, and we'll see what happens in her second character arc in a few hours tonight. Let's go ahead and talk about the Hulk briefly. All right, we're done. In all honesty, I have very little to say about the Hulk, or that's to say Bruce Banner, and it mostly is due to the fact that he hasn't really had much of a cinematic presence. He has effectively been in one movie. That being said, I'm just going to say this, Mark Ruffalo is Bruce Banner as far as I'm concerned. In the same way that Tom Hiddleston is Loki and Robert Downey Jr. is Stark, Ruffalo nails the part beautifully. That perfect example of just being slightly nervous, but being constantly on the edge, but trying to be controlled, and a very focused mind underneath all that, a lot of discipline. He hits that balance point perfectly. I will also say one other thing. One of the things that Ruffalo's performance got across really nicely, and basically does tie in his first character arc, is the fact that he's basically already had his first character arc by the time Avengers 1 started. What we see across Avengers is us, the audience, having that revealed to us. His line, "I'm always angry," really does explain everything in one line. Which is funny, because I've heard it interpreted like 5 different ways. And again, it's one of those little tidbits that I've heard interpreted a lot of different ways. My personal interpretation of that is the fact that when I say he is literally, he means it literally. He is always angry. He is always on the boiling point. Rather than trying to suppress his anger so it explodes, he keeps it right here, simmering. And he focuses himself, and he focuses his anger into his work and what he's doing and how he's doing it, rather than trying to let it actually boil out. It's also telling that when he has a controlled outburst of that anger, it's smooth, quick, and causes him no pain. And yet when he is injured horribly and trying desperately not to turn, it is a long, torturous, slow change into the Hulk that is clearly very painful. It shows that he can still be forced into the Hulk, as happened on the helicarrier. But when he's in control, just like that. Let's talk about Captain America. I'm only going to talk about him briefly, because honestly, I basically just summarized his character in a nutshell. And yet the one thing that's really true about his character arc, and indeed that concludes in Captain America 2, is the unworthiness, the guilt. He was never the soldier, the hero, the great, I am the one who's going to, be the living legend. He was never actually that, at least not in his mind. He was a guy from Brooklyn. He wanted to help. He tried to help. He succeeded at helping, and then things kind of went south, and then he just kind of kept running up, keeping pace with what he knew. The way he approaches Fury is very telling. You hear with orders, sir. The mere fact that he refers to Fury as Sir says something right by itself. The fact that he is actually requesting orders says basically the same thing all over again. But by the time Captain America 2 comes, it's really come to head. Now, I mentioned that when they're in that scene with the scepter on the helicarrier, a lot of them are demonstrating parts of their character arc in that scene. And in Cap's case, he says it right out. Except he's not saying it to himself. He says it to Stark. Everything he's saying to Stark, he is saying about himself. Forgive me for the inexact quote, but I know, I know guys with less than that are worth 10 of you. He genuinely believes he is unworthy of the legacy that he has, and he has seen so many of his friends and family die as a result of being better men than him. He has a great deal of survivor's guilt as a result of that, I'd say. And I feel like his actions with the Avengers, and especially his joining S.H.I.E.L.D. prior to and during Captain America 2, is about him trying to to make up for that. To pay back society, basically. And it is while he is going through that he realizes that society isn't the same society anymore. Oh, and by the way, Hydra evil, etc. But I say his character arc concludes in Captain America 2 because he finally realizes that he is only himself by the end of Captain America 2. His last line to Bucky really emphasizes this. I'm with you to the end. I'm not a hero or a legend or anything like that, but I'm also not someone who is unworthy of being here. All I am is me. And so his willingness to put his life on the line literally for Bucky in that situation, the Winter Soldier, really demonstrates the fact that he has come to grips and completed his own realization of who and what he is. And again, it'll be very interesting to see what they do with him in his second act tonight. Stark is my favorite to talk about, so I'm going to just kind of skip ahead a bit because I love talking about Tony Stark. Robert Downey Jr.'s performance is surprisingly subtle for someone who's running around chewing on the scenery. But I always love subtlety and obviousness. It's a favorite thing of mine, especially in audiovisual medium, video games, movies, television. Stark had a horrible, horrible thing happen to him. Try to imagine this for a moment. I mean, it's difficult for you and I to imagine this. It really is, because we don't live like this. Stark lived a life of abject luxury, completely on top of the world and everything around him. He was the guy. He had the money, he had the women, he had the technology, he had more money. He was on top of everything, and he knew it. And he was living the high life, and then he nearly died and got hit by a bomb right in the face, a Jericho missile, to be more specific. Nearly died and was thrown in a cave and forced to make do with what he had in there. Now, I've heard some people argue, and this is one of the few things I'm going to disagree with. Normally, I'm totally with... Well, okay, I shouldn't say that. I'm saying this wrong. I'm totally with disagreeing opinions, but there are a few opinions that I'm not... most opinions that I hear that disagree with me, I'm usually at least willing to give you some credence. This is one I'm not, is what I'm saying. I fully disagree with this opinion. I've heard some people posit the opinion that Stark's rather sudden turnaround from, ha-ha, I'm Playboy idiot, to Tony Stark, that as we see him in the movies, was too sudden. I disagree. Part of that is because I know what it's like to go through an extremely traumatic experience in my life and have everything just in the matter of 3 days. I know exactly what that's like. I don't know it to the extreme that he does, but that's exactly my point. He had it to an extreme, a severe amount. He went from top of the world to barely surviving. That's going to change a person. But the real relevant point about Stark is not the fact that he had his change of heart. No pun intended. It's the fact that Stark never recovered. I know Iron Man 3 kind of does this, honestly, a little bit too overtly, in my opinion. But there are hints of it in Iron Man... Well, okay, in Iron Man 2, it's pretty obvious that he's going cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But Avengers, I feel, is the one that was the most subtle with it, and therefore the best presented. Stark never recovered from that cave. He got out, but he never left it. You understand what I mean? He was struggling with those events and just blindly pushing and shoving through. There's only the mission, and there's the next, you're the only person I have, and he has to keep pushing, he has to keep going because he cannot. He is incapable of emotionally and mentally facing what he went through. And that's understandable. He went through hell. And then, right after that, his longtime mentor and friend of his dad tried to murder him. Not just like a corporate takeover, which would be bad. No, actually tried to kill him. That, it just adds on to it, right? And so he endured, and he survived, but he never left that cave. And Avengers portrayed this best. His actions, oh God, they're so subtle. But my favorite, right, of all, that's not the scene with in the Scepter Room, like I mentioned with Cap, or with the Widow. Both of them show that character arc part in that scene as well. Stark does show his character arc in there, in that he is trying to kind of build himself up to make up for the fact that of how he really thinks. But he actually lays it all out when he's talking about Coulson. Watch that scene again. I'm telling you, there's the scene where he's standing there, he's in the shirt, the Iron Man shirt, and Captain America comes and they start talking about Coulson, who has died, spoiler alert, and didn't become the Vision. Actually, I don't know if that's true, because we'll see the Vision. I'll see the Vision tonight, so I'll see who the Vision actually is tonight. Anyways, he's there, and he starts talking about him, and the first thing he says, he was an idiot. He should have had backup. He should have come in. He had no idea what he was doing. Listen to what he's saying, and replace the usage of replace the target of his words from Coulson with himself. He's not talking about Coulson. He's talking about himself. It's the first moment since Iron Man 1 where he's really sat down and thought about all that's happened to him. And really gone out and laid it out in his own deceptive way about how he has no idea what he's doing. About how he's an idiot. About how he should have gotten help, or he should have called for backup, or he should have something. He failed. And that comes to a head fully and formally in Iron Man 3, where he actually finally starts mentally breaking down and having panic attacks. Not just about New York. About everything. New York was just it's the straw. The one bit of straw that breaks that back, right? And it's a big straw, admittedly. You're fighting an alien army that's invading from another realm because an ancient titan the mad titan wants to crush you like a bug in order to satisfy the whims of a deity from another dimension. I mean, for God's sakes, that is a pretty big straw, but it is just a straw amongst others. Hence his recovery period throughout Iron Man 3, leading to the culmination of his first character arc, which is actually fairly obvious and I don't feel the need to discuss. For the record, I liked Iron Man 3. I know I'm kind of in the minority in that. I hear lots of people bashing it. I enjoyed it. I especially enjoyed the Mandarin thing. And yeah, go ahead, flame me for it. It's okay. I'll take it. I'll endure it. Thor's character arc is probably the most obvious of the various character arcs, but it's also funny because it's not the one I thought at first. When I actually sat down, rewatched the movies, analyzed them, I was like, okay. The obvious character arc is, oh, I'm a pompous asshole, to, oh, okay, I'm a decent person. But that actually only happens in the first movie. His real character arc goes throughout all three movies, just like everyone else I've mentioned, with the exception of Loki. First movie's obvious. He gets a smack of humility in the face, and again, it makes sense. He really does get a smack of humility in the face. One of those smacks comes in the face of a van. He loses all his power, all his pompousness, all his wonderful tables and gold areas and all the food and luxury and women and all those wonderful things. No, it's all gone, along with all his power, along with all his superiority, and he's just nothing. He's nobody. And then he gets the news that his mother's dead, his father's dead, his mother doesn't want him coming back, all this horrible stuff. Or was it his father was an Odin sleep? I don't remember. It doesn't matter. Point being, he's smacked in the face with humility, and he actually takes to it, really showing the kind of character he is, I think. But that is only the very first step of his character arc, because in Avengers, he has several scenes where he really gets across the point that he doesn't know what the hell he's doing. I know this sounds like a common trend amongst these characters, but it's worth noting, because he doesn't know what he's doing. If you put him in front of an enemy, done. You put him in front of a kingdom, he has no idea how to deal with that. He takes all that he knows about being a leader from his father, but he is only aping it. And it's obvious in the way he talks, especially in Avengers, to Loki, that he is only aping what his father has taught him. He has not actually discovered any form of wisdom of himself yet. The difference in the speeches between what he tells Loki in the first scene when he encounters him in Avengers and what he tells Loki in the very end of Thor 2 really demonstrates how much he has grown through that. And that is his character arc, by the way. The understanding of who and what he is. Which, again, sounds familiar compared to the other characters. Thor has come to the discovery that he is not a king. He is not a leader of men. He is not someone who should be wise or counsel or in charge of others. He is not superior. He is a guardian. And that is what he wants to do. And that is what he chooses to do. And I like that, first of all. But it's going to be interesting how that comes around again tonight. I know I keep saying that. That's all the major characters. You notice I'm not talking about Hawkeye. It's not on purpose. I actually like Hawkeye in the movie. And I gotta stress that because I can't stand Hawkeye in the comics. That's an exaggeration. I think Hawkeye's dumb in the comics, and that's the end of that. It's not my big deal. The older comics, to be more specific. But I like Hawkeye as he's demonstrated. It's just we haven't really seen Hawkeye yet. I'm hopeful we get to see Hawkeye in Ultron so I can actually talk about his character, because all I could say is the fact that he is the kind of character, if I were to analyze him in brief, who adapts to unusual circumstance by breaking it down. He is a surprisingly simple man. I don't mean dumb. I'm kind of pulling the O'Brien thing in here. He is uncomplicated. To him, there is orders, there's his mission, and there's his own perspective on things, which is, again, very down to earth. The way he talks about going after Loki really summarizes this in a nutshell. It would make me feel better if I put an arrow through his eye. You know, that sounds like a tongue-in-cheek thing, but really, I feel like he means that. Okay, what I mean by that is I feel like that's as far as he's thinking. He's not thinking 12 steps ahead. He's not trying to look at the big picture. He's not trying to understand that they are living in a world of magic and gods and monsters. He just sees a guy he doesn't like who hurt him a lot and hurt people he cares about a lot. So, let's go deal with that. Simple, not stupid, very skilled. I would actually be not completely unsurprised if he turns out to be one of the, what do they call them, the Inhumans? I can never remember. Mutants, a.k.a. not mutants. I could do a whole discussion about that, but I've talked about that on my stream enough. I don't want to talk about it here. Let's talk about the Avengers themselves. Now, I mentioned Widow belongs in the Avengers. The Avengers is one of those interesting groups, because when you look at them, on the one hand, it's like, wow, they're all really weak. I mean, on an overall power scale, we've got a guy who's barely metahuman, a guy who's got a suit that makes him barely metahuman, a guy who, despite his strength and endurance, doesn't really have anything going for him other than that, and the Hulk, who's admittedly like up here, and of course Widow and Hawkeye. I mean, they're all down here, power level. What the heck is... And this has always been true in the comics too, at least with the core Avengers. I know there's several groups called the Avengers. You know, let's not even get into that. We're just talking about the core Avengers here. This is all, including Ant-Man. This is still true. They're all relatively low power level. Why is it the Avengers can tackle people of such significance and scale that they can? Well, the answer is obvious. It's actually two-part. One is skill. The way they apply their relatively lack of power, they do so at such a level so that, and I've always said, you know, you've got power, skill, and overall strength. So your power times your skill equals your strength, just to make this really basic, right? But the point is, your power, whatever it is, can only be applied so much, right? If you're really strong but you don't know how to use it, you are actually much weaker in total strength than your power would indicate, right? But if you are weak, but use that very, very, with a great deal of skill, with a great deal of precision and care, you are actually much stronger than your power would indicate. And this is what the Avengers all do. This is one of the reasons why Widow belongs in this group, because she actually uses a near superhuman level, and arguably superhuman given what we've learned about in the shows, but we'll see how that plays out. Near superhuman level of, again, that manipulation, that self-control, in order to basically be a lot higher up in terms of relative strength than she should be. And this is true for all the Avengers, especially the Captain. But the other reason is they work as a team. This is something that I find fascinating, because it's hard to explain mathematically, because I'm bad at explaining math, so it's hard for me to explain mathematically what happens when you multiply a group. The easiest way I can explain this is to look at World of Warcraft. One person going into a raid is going to have a hell of a time going through it. I know there's variables here, just bear with me. One person can barely do it. Two people can breeze through it. Their power level, their relative strength level, didn't double. It multiplied. It's increased by more than just the factor of 2, or an additional factor. It has increased a significant amount, a multiplicative amount, like I said. It's hard to explain how that kind of teamwork goes, but the point is, when you have genuine teamwork going, the two, you working with them, working with you, your effective skill level has gone up, basically. So instead of being multiplied by 1.8, you're now multiplying it by like 3.7. In addition to the fact that he's also multiplying it by 3.7. So your total strength level is higher. You see how I'm explaining this really boringly and stupidly, so forgive me. But I've always felt that's how the Avengers can really do what they do. It's ironic because the Avengers assembling is actually what makes them a notable threat level compared to the things they fight. One of the things that I heard a lot back when Avengers came out from outcriers of the film is that the big action sequence at the end was dumb. Why is it that people like this big action sequence when people will decry the exact same stuff in, for example, the Transformers? Well, I've already given you that answer, haven't I? In the Transformers, it's very well done visual effects, and it's a big explosive action scene, but there's no significance there, at least in most of them. In the big action scene at the end of the Avengers, yeah, it's the same kind of stuff on the screen. I would argue it has better direction, better visual effects, better sound design, and better choreography, but ignoring that, that big action scene was all about the Avengers assembling. The whole of the Avengers movie has been about the group finally getting together and finally working as a team. They don't actually start working as a team until the battle at the end of the movie. That's why it's the climax of the movie. That's why there's no end boss, really. They don't go up against Loki. They go up against the army. They defeat this army as a team, fighting up against something that is way past their relative power level. Because they can, now that they're actually getting that teamwork together, really showcasing what the Avengers can do. That's why that scene's awesome, at least for people like me, who really think about that sort of thing. But this is relevant because we have to talk about our final character before we finally cut this off. This is already longer than I thought it would be. Sorry, guys. Ultron. Now, Loki was a perfect villain for the Avengers, now that I think about it. Not only because he was Tom Hiddleston and just knocked it out of the park in Thor 1, but because the first villain had to be low power. He had to be weak, for all intents and purposes. Again, because the first movie, Avengers, is all about the Avengers assembling. Like I said, the climax is them assembling and taking out the army. The army's the villain at that point, not Loki. Yeah, I know, there's the scene where, they curb stomp Loki without even trying, but point remaining. Puny God. Point being, they needed someone low power for that. Now, let's take a step back here. Let's say you're going to do a movie about any franchise, or a game about any franchise. It doesn't really matter. You're going to do a work, and you're going to take it about an existing IP. You never bring out the big guns right at the beginning. Never. There are some exceptions to this, but when I say big guns, I mean like the big threat guns. You could argue that sometimes you do bring out the big guns first. The Joker in Batman, Batman, Tim Burton's Batman, is arguably an exception to this. But even then, the Joker isn't really a big gun so much as he's the Joker. It's debatable that he's not the biggest gun in Batman's villainy arsenal, but I don't want to get into semantics. It can work, but in general, you don't want to bring out your big guns first. You need to save them for last. You don't want to start an X-Men movie with Apocalypse. You don't want to start a Superman movie with Darkseid, etc., etc. So, you don't want to go up of an Avengers movie against Thanos. You do not want to do that right off the bat. You do want to hint at him, because you want people to come back and think, oh, God, Thanos. And hell, they're still hinting at him from what I understand. Well, I shouldn't say what I understand, because I know that the last hint of him was in Guardians of the Galaxy. Kind of a big hint, but anyways. So you start low. But they had to start really low, because it was all about that. But now you have to take it up a notch. The thing is, you don't have to take it up a notch from Avengers. This is the tricky thing about continuity. Because the Avengers is not the last movie that happened. This may be Avengers 2, but this is effectively MCU, like, 8 or whatever. So you have to take this threat level up from the Dark Elves, I suddenly can't think of it, the Cadmus people? It's not Cadmus, that's DC. Oh my God, I can't think of it. Everyone's going to comment and tell me what it is. The people in Iron Man 3, and Hydra in Captain America 2. We have to go... all of those three threats, I would argue, were a step up from Loki and his army. And now we have to go a step up from all three of those threats. Now, you could argue the Dark Elf threat is hard to go up from because they were threatening the multiverse, but that's not quite how that works. Yes, the threat was to the multiverse, but the actual enemy was just the Dark Elves, who were just stronger. they were stronger and better than the Asgardians, and in fact, it took a significant effort to actually bring them down. But if it wasn't for the Aetherite, they would just be a step. You see how I'm thinking of this, right? So you have to bring it one step up. Well, the funny thing is, Ultron is almost a perfect puzzle piece for this. Ultron combines the type of threats that all of them have faced. He has the aspects of from the three major franchises. He has the aspects of the technology, of using technology to do more than what you should be able to do, tool use, that kind of a thing. From Iron Man, he has the entire concept of basically metahumanness and the growing increased aspect of that from Captain America. And of course, finally and most obviously, he does have a degree of mystical element to him, given his access and control over the Inhumans involved. At least that's what I'm assuming, which relates to the Thor thing. So he's a type of threat that all three of them have faced. He is just a higher scale threat than all of them previous. I've always liked Ultron as a character. He's among my favorite villains of the Avengers. In fact, I would say he is one of the two villains of the Avengers I've actually liked ever from the comics, the other one being Thanos himself. And it's hard to explain why in a nutshell. I've been asked this before. It has to do with two things. Number one, he has a personality. He's not just a rogue AI. He is basically a person who happens to exist as a program. And that adds levels of nuance and personality to him, which makes him more interesting to me. And also it helps explain how he loses, because along with the word personality, we must also add the word flaw. The other thing, though, is that he is always, at least in my interpretation of him, and I believe this is going to be true in the movies as well, he is an example of blue and orange morality, as opposed to black and white. For those of you who don't know what I mean by this, he literally thinks of things differently than we do, and so therefore has a completely different ethical axis than what we have. Same type of events, but it's like this instead of this, right? This is so beautifully demonstrated in the trailer. The first trailer, I want to say? I think it was the first trailer, where he has a line which, in my opinion, is the best way to summarize Ultron in a single line. I want to show you something beautiful. Everyone screaming for mercy. That line is, in my perspective, Ultron. He's not saying that to be villainous or evil. He thinks that's beautiful. He thinks that's wondrous. It's like a wonderful sunrise or sunset, whatever we're at here. You know? It's something amazing and gorgeous, and he wants to share it with you. Isn't it wonderful how all these people are screaming? And the idea that he is trying to help the world and save it by doing exactly what it is he believes is the best method to do that is also logical. The fact that he also has a massive ego, at least in the comics, we'll see if that comes through in the movie, but is the kind of thing that I could completely see going into that, because after all, it's logical, as horrible as that sounds, to have a massive ego when you are provably superior. It's the Khan problem all over again from over in Star Trek, which I'll be talking about when we get to DS9, actually, believe it or not. So Ultron is a perfect next puzzle piece for the Avengers to go up against. Someone who could really challenge all of them. Someone who brings the threat level both in more personally, since the Avengers build him, in this case, Iron Man instead of Hank, and it is stronger, and as someone who could really challenge them and push them to the next level, which then kickstarts all of their continuing arcs, their second arcs, I should say, their second character arcs. At least I'm hoping this, and then which will then be fulfilled in the movies that are to come. The one interesting thing in all of this that I haven't been talking about is, again, Banner. To my knowledge, there is still no Hulk movie coming, which means anything that's going to be done characterized with Bruce Banner has to happen in this movie. It's worth noting that a lot of the trailer footage, percentage-wise, is actually showing the Hulk, or Banner, or both for that matter. I feel like that's being done on purpose. I think he is going to get a fair larger amount of screen time than the others are, and it's going to be done because he doesn't get a movie of his own, so that's logical. Lord knows Joss Whedon knows how to part and parcel out that kind of ensemble cast in order to do that kind of a thing. My final thoughts, before I cut this off here, is that I am... Even if this movie is not that great, and even if this is the first chink in the armor, so to speak, although I think it's more likely Ant-Man will be that at this point, I can't deny that there's something really enjoyable about getting nice and hyped, about going to see something, at a midnight showing with my friends, and I think that's awesome, and I just wanted to share that. So I hope you guys will be joining me in the enjoyment, and feel free to tell me how stupid I am in the comments. See you around, guys.